Your wires are ugly. I had them removed.
No vote, no notice, no legal authority. Just a woman with a title, a contractor, and the kind of smile you only wear when you're certain there are no consequences. I looked down at my fiber line, cut clean at both ends, lying in the dirt like it meant nothing. Licensed install, code compliant. My entire home business running through that cable every single day. Gone. Because she didn't like how it looked against the fence. She was still standing there when I looked up, waiting for a reaction. I said nothing. I went inside. I made one call. Here's what nobody tells you about people like Vivian Hartwell. The higher they build it, the louder it falls. Drop your state in the comments, because what she did that morning was just the beginning, and so was what I did next. I should back up because Vivian didn't just wake up that morning and decide to commit a federal crime. She'd been warming up for it for 9 months, and I'd been letting her, which, in hindsight, was my first mistake. My name is Garrett Winslow. I'm a home-based IT security consultant. I live, or lived peacefully until recently, in Creekside Estates, a planned community outside Boise, Idaho. The kind of place where the mailboxes are all the same shade of hunter green. The HOA newsletter gets more circulation than the local paper. And someone once filed a violation notice about a wind chime. True story. Not mine, but true. I moved in 7 years ago with my daughter Petra, who was 12 at the time, and my father Raymond, who'd just been diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's. The house made sense on every level. Single story for Raymond, good schools for Petra, a proper home office setup for me. The mornings there used to smell like pine sap and cut grass. Raymond would shuffle around the kitchen while I had my first coffee on the back porch. The creak of the hardwood floors inside like a familiar old song. Petra would leave for school with a backpack so stuffed it could have anchored a boat. It was a good life. Clean, simple, sturdy. Then Vivian Hartwell ran for HOA president. I didn't vote in that election. 11 of 62 households did. Vivian won. That's all I'll say about how she got the job, except that it should have told me something about the foundation she was working from. Her first act was a mass notice to all residents about visual compliance, citing a vague CC and R provision about aesthetic harmony. CC and Rs, if you're lucky enough not to know, stands for covenants, conditions, and restrictions, the rule book that governs what you can and cannot do with property you legally own. And Vivian kept a copy in a 3-ring binder she carried like a weapon. My letter said my side yard cable conduit, gray PVC, flush against the fence, professionally installed to carry fiber optic internet to my home office, was visible from the sidewalk and inconsistent with community aesthetics. I wrote back, politely, with photos. The conduit was invisible from every common area at every angle. The installation was done by a licensed contractor to city code and national electrical code. I cited both. I was thorough. I was reasonable. I fully expected the matter to end there, because I was operating under the delusion that reasonable people respond to evidence. Vivian sent a second letter. The matter has been noted. Further action may follow. You know that particular smell of bureaucratic threat? Old paper and cheap authority. I filed the letter away. That was mistake number 1. What followed was 9 months of violation notices. Garbage cans the wrong shade of green. Hedges allegedly 3 inches too tall. A decorative stone near my mailbox that apparently violated something about non-approved landscape additions. Each notice came with a fine schedule. $25, $50, small enough that fighting it cost more than paying it. I fought every single one. Not because I'm stubborn. I mean, I am, but that's beside the point. But because I'd done enough contract work for companies to know that unchallenged violations become precedents, and precedents become leverage. I documented everything, photographed my property the day each notice arrived, wrote formal responses with rule citations, built a paper trail so thick it could have stopped a bullet. Vivian kept going anyway. The night before the internet went out, I remember hearing a contractor truck on my street. The crunch of gravel under heavy tires, the low idle of a diesel engine somewhere in the dark. I didn't think much of it. I went to bed. I woke up without internet. I walked outside and saw the conduit, or what was left of it, cut cleanly at both ends. Professional work, actually. Whoever did it knew exactly what they were doing. Vivian was 40 feet away in that cream cardigan, watching me with the expression of someone who has waited a long time for a moment and is extremely pleased it has finally arrived. I looked at the cut wire. I looked at Petra's school laptop, now a paperweight. I looked at Raymond through the window, confused by the dead TV. I looked at my office, where 3 clients were waiting on a cybersecurity audit I'd been finalizing. Community standards, Vivian said again. Okay, Vivian, I said. I went back inside and started making calls. The first call I made wasn't to my internet provider. It was to my neighbor Dale Fischetti. Dale is 67, retired lineman for the power company, and constitutionally incapable of tolerating abuse of authority. He was at my door in 6 minutes with a coffee mug and the unhurried expression of a man who has seen everything and is mildly entertained by most of it. He crouched down next to the cut conduit and touched the edge with one thick finger. Bolt cutters or reciprocating saw, he said. Clean job. Somebody knew what they were doing. She hired someone. Yep. He stood up. You know what that is, right? That's not just HOA business. That's destruction of private property. And if that conduit was carrying a licensed telecommunications line, commercial fiber, T1 line for my home business. Dale nodded slowly, the way people nod when they already know the answer to the question they're about to ask. Then she just walked herself into federal jurisdiction. Federal. The word sat in the air between us for a second. I went inside and started building the record. First call, my internet provider, to document the physical disconnection and request a technician's report confirming the line had been cut intentionally, not failed by equipment. The rep took 40 minutes to understand why I needed a damage report rather than a service ticket. I waited. When you're building a paper trail, 40 minutes is nothing. Second call, Boise PD non-emergency line. Filed a report for destruction of private property. The dispatcher was sympathetic in the way dispatchers are when they're professionally sympathetic without making promises. Third call, Meredith Qualls, an attorney I'd consulted once before on a property matter. She picked up on the second ring, listened to my 2-minute summary, and then went quiet. Tell me the conduit was carrying fiber optic internet, she said. Commercial T1, licensed through a business provider. A beat. Garrett, are you familiar with 47 U.S.C.? Section 223 and its companion statutes on interference with telecommunications infrastructure. I was not. But here's what it means, and write this down if you own a home. Under federal telecommunications law, intentionally damaging or interfering with licensed telecommunications equipment is a federal offense, not a civil nuisance, not an HOA matter, a federal crime. The moment Vivian hired someone to physically cut my fiber line, she potentially stepped out of petty neighborhood politics and into something with a completely different set of consequences. Meredith told me to document everything and sit tight. Meanwhile, Vivian was not sitting tight. By noon, she had hand-delivered a formal HOA violation notice to my door. Unauthorized telecommunications installation creating visual obstruction, with a demand that the conduit be removed within 10 days, or fines would accumulate at $100 per day. She had also sent a neighborhood email blast, subject line, maintaining our community standards, that didn't name me, but described my situation in enough detail that anyone in Creekside with functioning eyes could connect the dots. This was her second mistake, bigger than the first. She'd put it in writing, group email, time-stamped, sent to 62 households. I forwarded it to Meredith within 3 minutes of receiving it. Then I went outside with my phone and filmed a slow, methodical walkthrough of my property. The conduit along the fence line, both cut points, the surrounding area. I narrated as I walked, calm and factual, like I was doing a site audit for a client, which, in a way, I was. The afternoon air was dry, the kind of dry that rolls in off the high desert and makes the pines smell sharper than usual. I uploaded the video to a secure cloud folder, labeled it with date and time, and sent the link to Meredith. Then I went inside and made Raymond a sandwich. I want to say something here about the restraint required in moments like these, because the honest version is that I was furious, not hot shouting furious, the cold kind, the kind that settles into your chest and makes you very, very deliberate about every word and action. I wanted to walk back across my yard and say things I'd regret on the record. I didn't. Here's the principle I was operating from, which 9 months of documentation had taught me. The person who moves first in anger almost always loses. They give the other side a story to tell about them. Disruptive resident, aggressive neighbor, hostile to community. Vivian had been trying to provoke that reaction from me for 9 months. I wasn't going to give it to her. I made the sandwich. I helped Petra set up a mobile hotspot for her homework. I spent the rest of the afternoon on cellular data, finishing the cybersecurity audit for my client. And I planned. 2 days after my internet was cut, the technician came out and restored service. In the process, he documented, in an official service report, that the line had been physically severed by external cutting tool, consistent with intentional interference. Intentional interference, official language, time-stamped, on company letterhead. I didn't frame it on the wall, but I thought about it. The 10-day violation window came and went. I did not remove the conduit. Instead, I filed a formal 12-page written response with the HOA board, citing 18 separate CC and R provisions, cross-referencing Idaho State Code, HOA law precedent, and federal telecommunications statute. I attached the technician's report, my original installation permits, the licensed contractor's sign-off, and a full timeline of the dispute going back 9 months. The $100 a day fine clock started anyway. Now, I want to talk about HOA fines for a second, because this is the part that catches most people off guard. In isolation, $100 a day sounds annoying, but manageable. What most homeowners don't realize is that unpaid HOA fines compound, can convert to liens against your property, and in Idaho, as in many states, an unchallenged HOA lien can eventually lead to foreclosure proceedings. The fine isn't really about the money. It's about creating a debt instrument that gives the HOA leverage over your home. This is the hidden weapon. Death by 1,000 paper cuts, each one legally real. Meredith had already anticipated it. She filed a formal demand letter with the HOA board, citing CC and RS Section 7, Paragraph 3, which required a formal hearing before any fine exceeding $500 cumulative could be imposed. No hearing had been scheduled. No hearing had been offered. Therefore, any lien recorded against my property before the hearing process was exhausted would be challenged as procedurally void. She also, and I love this about Meredith, mentioned the federal telecommunications matter in the final paragraph of the letter. In passing, one sentence, like noting a footnote. The effect of that footnote on 2 of the 3 HOA board members was, I'm told, significant. The board consisted of Vivienne as president, a quiet retiree named Hubert Scroggins who voted however Vivienne told him, and Cassandra Pruitt, a real estate agent who had grown increasingly uncomfortable with the way Vivienne operated, but hadn't found the right moment to say so. Cassandra called me the evening after the letter went out. She spoke quietly. I voted against the fine schedule, she said. 2-1. I figured, I said. I hadn't, but it seemed right to say. I appreciate you telling me. She's going to try to remove me from the board, Cassandra said. She's already drafted the notice. There it was. Vivian wasn't just punishing me, she was purging her own board. The moment anyone in her orbit showed independent judgment, she moved to eliminate them. This had stopped being about cable conduits a long time ago. Cassandra, I said, do you have access to the HOA's financial records, the full accounts? A pause. I'm a board member. I should, yes. Have you ever actually reviewed them? The pause that followed was longer. No, she said, I haven't. Here's the thing about petty authoritarians. They count on nobody looking. They rely on the paperwork being boring enough that people don't read it, on the power being diffuse enough that accountability never quite lands anywhere. Vivian had been running the Creekside Estates HOA for 3 years. She had signatory authority on the operating account. She'd directed maintenance contracts, vendor relationships, and, as it had recently emerged, subcontracted work orders, like a contractor hired to cut a specific cable conduit on a specific Tuesday morning. Cassandra, I said, is there a line item in the HOA ledger for a utility contractor in the last 30 days? The silence on the phone was the sound of a very large domino beginning to tip. Most homeowners treat HOA financial records the way they treat software terms and conditions. Acknowledge they exist, never actually read them. I understand the impulse. The documents are dense, the line items are boring, and the assumption is that some responsible adult is watching the money, so you don't have to. That assumption is doing a lot of heavy lifting, and sometimes it collapses under the weight. Every HOA in America is legally required to maintain financial records and make them available to members upon request. In Idaho, that's Idaho Code Section 55-116. The request window is 10 to 15 business days. Most HOA boards survive on the statistical certainty that almost nobody ever makes the request. Cassandra filed it the morning after our phone call. As a board member, she had the authority to do it without Vivian's approval, which meant Vivian didn't find out until the HOA's management company, a mid-sized outfit out of Nampa called Creekside Property Solutions, was already pulling the files. What Cassandra found was what I can only describe professionally as a mess. 3 vendor payments in the previous 60 days, with no corresponding bid documentation, no board majority work order approval, and no line item in the previously approved annual budget. One to a landscaping company, modest, possibly routine. One to an electrical supply company for materials, with no corresponding job description attached. And the third, dated 4 days before my internet was cut, was a cash payment listed in the ledger simply as exterior maintenance, contractor, $340, paid to a sole proprietor entity called Blackthorn Property Services, an LLC formed 3 weeks prior to the payment with no other public business record. $340, paid to a brand new LLC that appeared to have been created specifically for this transaction. Cassandra photographed every relevant page and drove to my house that afternoon. The evening light was going orange and low over the Boise foothills, that particular Idaho late afternoon gold that makes you feel like you're living inside a landscape painting and briefly forget about the HOA. We sat at my kitchen table, Raymond waving from his recliner, and she spread the photographs out between us like evidence at trial, which, it was becoming apparent, was exactly what it was. I called Meredith. "We have a cash payment to a newly formed LLC, made 4 days before the incident," I said. "No board approval, no budget authorization, no documented work scope." Meredith's response was immediate. "That's not just civil territory anymore. Potential misappropriation of HOA funds. And if that payment directed the action against your fiber line, we're compounding telecommunications interference with HOA fraud." She told me to sit tight. She had calls to make. Meanwhile, Vivian, sensing something shifting, did what threatened people with a little power always do. She escalated in every direction simultaneously. Another neighborhood email blast about community trust and residents who prioritize personal convenience over neighborhood harmony. It was less subtle than her previous ones. A retired schoolteacher named Willa Beaumont, 12-year Creekside resident, replied to the whole list. "With respect, I find this communication divisive and would like to see the HOA address concerns through the formal dispute process." 3 other residents replied in agreement within the hour. Vivian's grip on the community narrative was starting to slip, and I still hadn't played my real cards. 3 weeks in, Meredith called me with the tone lawyers use when something has moved from interesting to significant. "Sit down," she said. I was already sitting. I was eating cereal at 10 in the morning because Raymond had eaten the last of the eggs, and I'd been too absorbed in research to shop. I sat up straighter. "Blackthorn Property Services," Meredith said. "I had someone run a proper search on the LLC formation documents. And? The registered agent is a woman named Deborah Hartwell." I set down the spoon. "Vivian's sister-in-law," I said. "Her husband's younger sister. Now here's the rest of it." Meredith paused, the way she pauses when she wants you to really hear the next sentence. "Blackthorn has received HOA payments from 3 other Creekside line items over the past 18 months. Not just yours, 3 others, all vaguely categorized, none with attached work orders. Total, over 18 months, a little over $11,000. $11,000, routed through a family-connected LLC. No competitive bidding, no board authorization, no documented work. The word for this situation is not mismanagement. The word is embezzlement. I want to give you the legal framework here because this matters. Under Idaho law and IRS rules governing nonprofit HOA organizations, most HOAs are structured as nonprofits. The unauthorized diversion of common funds to personally connected entities can constitute civil fraud and criminal theft. This wasn't just an internal dispute anymore. This was potentially a crime. Meredith had already been in contact with the FBI's regional office in Boise, not because she'd gone looking for federal attention, but because the combination of telecommunications interference and financial fraud had put the case in a category that interested them. Specifically, the Financial Crimes Unit. Special Agent Donahue called me that afternoon. Brief, professional, asked me to preserve all records and communications related to the HOA, the contractor, and the incident. Asked me not to discuss the financial investigation publicly. I agreed immediately. I went to the back porch afterward. The pine smell was heavy in the evening air, the way it gets after a warm afternoon when the sap runs. I stood there thinking about the particular irony of Vivian Hartwell, who had cut my internet over community aesthetics, now being of interest to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The community had standards, after all. Raymond came out with 2 mugs, decaf for him, real coffee for me. We sat without saying much while the sky went dark. "You going to be okay?" he asked eventually. "Yeah, Pop." He wrapped both hands around his mug, the Parkinson's tremor visible in the way the coffee moved. "Good. I never liked that woman." I laughed. Actually laughed, for the first time in weeks. Something loosened in my chest, but only a little. There was still a lot of work to do. The next 3 weeks were completely quiet from my property. No confrontations, no responses to Vivian's email blasts, no board meetings attended, no fines paid. From the outside, it looked like I'd given up. I had not given up. Meredith was constructing a civil lawsuit on 4 tracks simultaneously. First, destruction of private property, the conduit, the service disruption, the technician's report. Idaho law allows for both replacement costs and consequential damages from willful destruction. I had 3 days of lost billable hours at consulting rate, documented on client records. That's real money, demonstrable loss. Second track, tortious interference with business relations. The service disruption had delayed delivery of a security audit to a paying client, who had documented the delay in email. That email was now an exhibit. Third, HOA procedural violations, fines without hearings, notices without board authorization, systematic violation of the CC and R's own dispute resolution process. Fourth, and most potent, civil RICO, racketeer-influenced and corrupt organizations. I know, sounds like we're going after the mob. But civil RICO can be filed against individuals and organizations that engage in a pattern of fraud. The Blackthorn scheme, if proven, constituted exactly that. And RICO carries treble damages, meaning if the court finds $11,000 in fraudulent payments, they can award $33,000 plus attorney's fees. Write that down. Civil RICO, treble damages, attorney's fees. It's the legal equivalent of a counterattack that hits 3 times as hard as the original blow. While Meredith built the lawsuit, I worked the quieter track. 62 households, 1 conversation at a time. Not with flyers or social media posts, with the financial records. I started with Dale and Willa Beaumont, then the Pendergast family, who'd gotten a noise violation after their kid's birthday party. The Duncan family, whose basketball hoop had generated 3 notices. The Calloway family, fighting a mulch color dispute for 8 months. I didn't ask anyone to do anything. I just showed them the ledger pages and let them read. Something interesting happens when you show people who've been individually ground down by petty enforcement that they're not isolated cases, that there's a pattern, that patterns have architects. 22 households signed a formal petition requesting a special HOA membership meeting, which, under Creekside's bylaws, required 15% of the membership. 22 of 62 is 35%, more than enough. The petition also demanded an independent financial audit. Under Idaho law, 20% of HOA members can require one. We had 35. Cassandra filed the audit request through the management company. The management company, aware by now that federal investigators had been in contact and deeply uninterested in liability, complied within a week. Dale, meanwhile, was doing something practical and wonderful. He'd produced a 3-page technical report documenting the conduit installation from scratch, measurements, photographs, NEC code citations, proof that the installation was compliant in every respect, and invisible from all common areas. He'd also calculated the reinstallation cost, accounting for the ground disturbance caused by the contractor's removal work. It was the most enjoyable document I've ever received. I also quietly emailed Thea Forsyth, a reporter at the Idaho Statesman who covered local government and community affairs. I sent her the financial documents and told her there was a story developing, with a public meeting scheduled in 2 weeks. She replied within the hour. "I'm very interested. Please keep me posted." The board was set, every piece in place. Vivian was still sending email blasts about community standards. She had absolutely no idea what was coming. Vivian wasn't stupid. She was paranoid, which, under the circumstances, turned out to be worse. She could feel something shifting. The petition had been filed. The audit had been requested. Hubert Scroggins had stopped returning her calls. Cassandra had hired her own attorney. The management company had gone quietly unresponsive to several of her instructions. Her response was to do what cornered people with a little power always do: swing in every direction and hope something lands. First move was financial. She instructed the management company to record a formal lien against my property for the accumulated fine total, by now $1,400. An HOA lien is a real recorded legal instrument. It shows up in title searches. It signals a financial dispute attached to your home. It's designed to make people panic and pay immediately. Meredith filed the challenge within 48 hours, citing the missed hearing requirement. The lien was suspended pending resolution, but in the process, the management company's own legal counsel had reviewed the file and sent them a formal written advisory. Further compliance with HOA board instructions related to this dispute would expose the company to liability. They notified both sides simultaneously. The machine Vivian had relied on to enforce her decisions had just refused to move. Second move was social and uglier. She started calling neighbors individually, painting me as a threat to property values, a rule flouter, a man who thought himself above the community. She called Dale Fischetti, who has lived in Creekside for 16 years, an outside agitator. She said the financial documents were fabricated. Some of it worked. 3 households briefly withdrew from the petition. But Willa Beaumont was documenting every call. She kept notes. She compared what she'd been told against what others had heard. And she sent a quiet, factual email to the 22 petitioning households. "I want to be transparent about the conversations some of us are having." The withdrawals stopped. Third move, and this is the one that truly baffles me in retrospect. She had Blackthorn Property Services, the LLC at the center of the financial investigation, file articles of dissolution with the Idaho Secretary of State. She dissolved it. I assume the logic was that eliminating the entity would make the financial trail harder to follow. But dissolving an LLC doesn't erase its financial records. It doesn't void its obligations. It doesn't make its transactions disappear from the management company's ledgers, from the bank records, from the documents the federal investigators had already requested. What dissolving a company under federal investigation does accomplish is something prosecutors call consciousness of guilt, the idea that you wouldn't be destroying evidence if you didn't know you had evidence worth destroying. S.A. Donahue's office knew about the dissolution within 24 hours. I found out from Meredith on a call that lasted 4 minutes. After she hung up, I sat at my desk for a moment thinking about the particular quality of watching someone dig their hole deeper in real time. That afternoon I had a video call with the Municipal Water Authority in Nevada, contract work that had come in 3 days after my internet went down, replacing the lost billing with interest. I walked them through a cybersecurity framework assessment, professional and focused, the HOA situation completely absent from my voice. That evening, Petra came home from school and found me actually cooking dinner for the first time in months. Chicken stir-fry, garlic and ginger in the pan, the kind of smell that makes a kitchen feel inhabited again. "You seem better," she said. "I am better." "Did something happen?" "Several things," I said. "Set the table. Raymond's already hungry." 5 days before the special membership meeting, Vivian filed a lawsuit against me. Ada County District Court. Complaint alleged willful disruption of HOA operations, harassment of board officers, and tortious interference with community governance. She attached the accumulated fine schedule, a declaration from Hubert Scroggins, and a 2-paragraph statement from an HOA management consultant she'd hired independently, without board authorization and without budget approval. I sent it to Meredith. She called me back in 20 minutes. "There's nothing in this that survives a motion to dismiss," she said, with the clinical calm of someone examining a broken piece of furniture. "This is a nuisance suit. She's trying to spook you into backing down before the meeting. Can we countersue for frivolous filing?" "Yes, and we will." Idaho has an anti-SLAPP statute, strategic lawsuit against public participation. When a lawsuit is filed primarily to silence or punish someone for exercising legal rights, organizing a petition, requesting an audit, the defendant can file a special motion to dismiss. If it's granted, the plaintiff pays the defendant's attorney fees. This is worth knowing regardless of whether you're ever in an HOA dispute. Anti-SLAPP laws exist in most states precisely because the threat of litigation is itself a weapon. If you're sued for doing something you had a legal right to do, look up your state's anti-SLAPP statute before you spend $1 on a conventional defense. The lawsuit had one consequence Vivian hadn't intended. It was public record. Thea Forsyth at the Idaho Statesman, who had been watching quietly for weeks, now had a filed court document she could cite directly. She published a news item the next day. Boise area HOA president faces audit demand. Files preemptive lawsuit against resident. Page B3. Roughly 60,000 readers and, more importantly, approximately 300 people in the local HOA community who read that section like it's scripture. Within 48 hours, 2 residents from other HOA communities in the Boise Valley had contacted Thea with their own accounts of Vivian's conduct. Apparently, Creekside Estates was not her first presidency. The pattern was wider than I'd known. The independent CPA completed the financial audit 4 days before the meeting, 9 pages. The summary paragraph used the phrase, "apparent misappropriation," 3 times. Total unauthorized disbursements over 22 months, $14,200. Not just Blackthorn, but 2 other entities with connections to Vivian's personal financial network. Cassandra received the report as the requesting board member. She forwarded it to S.A. Donahue's office, per his standing request. She also sent it to every petitioning household, attached to a formal meeting agenda. The night before the meeting, I sat on my back porch alone, after Raymond had gone to bed, and Petra was at a friend's house. Cold Idaho spring night, the kind where winter makes one last argument before giving up. Wood smoke from somewhere nearby drifting through the dark. Somewhere in the pines, an owl doing its owl thing. I thought about the 9 months before that Tuesday morning. The notices, the fines, the grinding smallness of it. I thought about standing at my own fence and looking at my cut internet line and feeling, for a moment, genuinely helpless. Not because of the wire, but because of the thing the wire represented. Someone had decided my property, my livelihood, my quiet, ordinary life was subject to her approval, and she'd acted on that decision with a bolt cutter. I thought about the 22 households who'd signed the petition, Willa and her bird feeder, Dale with his 6-minute walk and his retiree's unhurried certainty, the Pendergasts and their kid's birthday party, people who hadn't come looking for a fight, people who just wanted to live in their houses. We were all going to be in that glass-walled room tomorrow. I finished my coffee, went inside, and slept better than I had in months. The special membership meeting was called for 10 o'clock Saturday morning at the Creekside Estates Community Center, a glass-fronted rectangular room next to the neighborhood pool, visible from the main road through floor-to-ceiling windows. 47 of 62 households sent at least one person. People brought lawn chairs because the room held 30. Through the glass walls, you could see the crowd from the parking lot before you even opened the door. The morning was sharp and blue, the Boise foothills white-capped against a sky that had no interest in being subtle. Gravel crunched under dozens of shoes crossing the parking lot. Willa Beaumont had brought a fruit plate. Dale was dispensing coffee from a thermos in the parking lot, like a retired sacrament. Thea Forsyth was parked across the street with a notebook and a camera. Inside, the folding table at the front held 2 chairs, Cassandra Pruitt and the management company's representative, invited as a neutral witness. The chair where Vivian traditionally sat was empty when Cassandra called the meeting to order at 10:03. She arrived at 10:08. I heard the Lexus before I saw it. That particular quiet engine note, expensive and self-assured. She stepped out in a cream blazer, turned toward the building and stopped. She could see through the glass. All of it. 47 households. Her step hitched, just slightly. Then she composed herself and came in. The room went quiet in the specific way rooms do when everyone is pretending not to be watching something they are absolutely watching. Vivian sat down. She looked at the crowd. She looked at Cassandra's expression, which was calm and professional and completely unreadable. She looked at the management company rep, who was studying his paperwork with great dedication. She didn't look at me. I was in the third row with an empty manila folder on my lap. A habit from client meetings, something to hold so your hands stay still. Cassandra opened the meeting and moved immediately to item 1, the independent CPA's audit report. Ms. Halloran, the CPA, stood and delivered a 7-minute presentation. She used a projector. The numbers appeared on a white screen at the front of the room, visible through the glass walls to the parking lot, legible to anyone outside. $14,200, 22 months, 3 connected entities. Apparent misappropriation, on slide 3, in plain Arial font, 12-point, no drama needed. Vivian tried to speak twice. Cassandra reminded her each time that the meeting process required waiting for the presentation to conclude. At 10:23, 2 vehicles pulled through the Creekside Estates main entrance. Black Ford Expeditions, government plates. They didn't come to the building. S.A. Donahue and 2 colleagues parked along the community's maintenance yard perimeter, the yard that backed onto several properties, including one where investigators had identified HOA procured equipment being stored improperly. Equipment connected to Blackthorn Property Services, equipment that was part of the case. Someone in the meeting saw the expeditions through the glass, then someone else. A murmur moved through the room. Vivian turned in her chair and looked through the floor-to-ceiling windows at the 2 black vehicles parked in the community she had governed for 3 years. I watched her face change. It wasn't one expression, it was several, moving through in sequence. Confusion, then recognition, then something I can only describe as the moment a person understands that the thing they thought they'd outrun has been in front of them the whole time. The cream blazer, in that light, looked like something she'd put on without knowing what the day was going to be. The murmur in the room settled into silence. Cassandra called it back to order with a steady voice and moved to item 2, a vote on the removal of the current HOA president pending the financial audit outcome and related legal proceedings. Under Creekside's bylaws, simple majority of those present, 41-3. Willa Beaumont started the applause. Dale joined from the back, technically from outside the doorway because there weren't enough chairs, clapping slowly, like 2 pieces of wood coming together with absolute conviction. I didn't clap. I sat still, folder on my lap, and let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for 10 months. Outside, Vivian walked toward the parking lot and was met by S.A. Donahue, who had documents. They spoke briefly. She did not get back in the white Lexus immediately. Thea Forsyth's camera shutter clicked from across the street. Here's what I want you to understand about how these things end, because it's not the dramatic moment. The dramatic moment is just the moment. What actually matters is what grows in the space it clears. Vivian Hartwell was charged federally. 1 count of telecommunications infrastructure interference under 47 U.S.C. Section 223, 2 counts of wire fraud. Her sister-in-law, Deborah, pleaded to a lesser charge as part of a cooperation agreement. Hubert Scroggins resigned from the board and issued a written apology to the membership. Not the most meaningful document ever produced, but a document that existed and was dated and on file. Vivian's lawsuit against me was dismissed on anti-SLAPP grounds. She was ordered to pay my attorney's fees. I want to say that felt satisfying, and it did, but mostly it felt like arithmetic, like a correction being made on a ledger that had been wrong for too long. The civil settlement was confidential, as these things are. What I can tell you is that the accumulated fines were voided, the lien was formally released, my legal costs were covered, and there was a number attached to the outcome that let me replace the conduit, compensate for the lost billing period, and have something meaningful left over. Cassandra Pruitt was elected HOA president at the next annual meeting. Margin, 51-0, because nobody ran against her. That might be the rarest form of consensus in American civic life. Her first official act as president was commissioning a full CC&R legal review, an attorney going through every provision and flagging anything unenforceable under Idaho law, or that had been interpreted arbitrarily. 21 provisions were amended or removed over the following year. A formal hearing requirement was added for any fine exceeding $100, not $500, the threshold that mattered. Dale Fischetti joined the Architectural Review Committee, which is probably the best possible thing that could have happened for everyone involved, including the committee. Raymond watched the whole arc of the story from his recliner, drinking decaf, tracking the Idaho Statesman coverage. His editorial commentary was consistent and precise. "I told you I never liked that woman." Petra wrote a civics paper about the case for her AP government class. Systematic institutional advocacy through documentation and procedural knowledge. She got an A. Her teacher noted it was an unusual but accurate application of the concept. She helped run the registration table at the first community workshop the following spring. Which brings me to the part I actually want to leave you with. With a portion of the settlement and a small fundraising campaign organized by Willa Beaumont, because of course Willa organized a fundraising campaign, she's that kind of person. The Creekside Estates HOA launched something new, the Creekside Community Skills Fund, a scholarship and workshop program for residents and their families, covering trades education, financial literacy, and homeowner legal rights. The first year's programming included a session on reading your CC&Rs, taught by a volunteer HOA attorney, a financial literacy seminar for high school students run by a local credit union, and a home maintenance and code compliance clinic run by Dale Fischetti, who showed up with handouts he had laminated. 17 high school students came to the legal rights workshop. The room smelled like old books and fresh coffee, and outside the parking lot was full, and inside, people were learning how to read the documents that govern their lives, calmly, with the confidence of people who now knew what happened when someone decided those documents didn't apply to them. I sat in the back row and listened to a volunteer attorney explain HOA liens and how to fight them. I already knew all of it, but being in that room meant the room existed. That's the story, if you want the real version.
So that's the story. A woman with a title, contractor, and the absolute certainty that nobody would push back, but she was wrong. But here's what I want you to take from this, because Vivian isn't the point. Vivian is just the name on this particular version of a story that plays out in subdivisions across this country every single day. Garrett didn't win because he got lucky. It was because when she finally overplayed her hand, he had 9 months of documentation ready to go. Every notice was grabbed, every response field, every rule cited by number. The paperwork was the weapon, patience was the strategy. Most people pay the fine and move on. Garrett read the CC&Rs like the contract, because that's exactly what it is. And when Vivian crossed the line, he already had everything he needed. You might be sitting in the same position right now and not even know it. So here's my question from the comments. Have you ever paid an HOA fine without checking whether it was actually enforceable? Because there's a real chance some of you have leverage you never use. If this story is close to home, share it. Someone in your life needs to see it before they write that next check. Subscribe to HOA Story. Next week, a $40,000 special assessment award president who couldn't explain where half of it went, and a retired accountant who had nothing but time. You don't want to miss it.